Hey, good evening, everyone. If you haven't found a seat, if you can start to find your way to a seat, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. My name's 𝗬𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗘𝗡𝗧𝗦, and I'm the director of the Ratio Christi Club here at UNCW. We're the ones that invited Frank to come here for you to hear this presentation, and we're excited about it. Just to let you know a little bit about Ratio Christi, it stands for Reason of Christ, and we're a Christian apologetics club. And so basically, apologetics is just giving a defense or giving reasons for why you believe what you believe. So we claim that there is good evidence to support the truth of Christianity, that somebody should be a Christian not because you were raised that way, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. And we like to have conversations with people about that and give evidence as to why we think it's true. And so if you're here and you're a Christian, then great. We hope that tonight it will strengthen your faith so that you see all of the evidence that's in your corner for what you believe, and that the roots of your faith will go down deep, and that you'll also be able to have the confidence to engage in conversations with people who believe differently than you do. And if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, if you haven't crossed that line of faith, that's awesome. Ratio Christi welcomes non-believers or people of other faiths to our group because we feel like if we're all adults, we can all talk about evidence for what we believe. And if what I believe is true, I would hope that you'd be convinced and want to believe what's true. And similarly, if I'm believing something that's not true, I would want to know that and then change my beliefs. So if you're here and you're not a Christian, welcome. Hopefully the arguments that Frank presents, which are classical Christian arguments, are persuasive. If you're not quite persuaded, at the end of his presentation, there will be a couple of microphones in either aisle, and so he'll entertain any and all questions during a time. I'm not even sure how long we're going to let that go, but anything that's burdening your soul, any questions you've been wondering about are fair game. So we're excited again about Frank being here. Frank has a ministry called Cross-Examined, and you can go to his website, crossexamined.org. He travels around to college campuses, and he does this all over, and so we're really grateful for him and his ministry. And so if you would, please help me welcome Frank Turek.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening, Seahawks. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Monsoor's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Monsoor's High School in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Monsoor Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Monsoor, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗡𝗧𝗦 class. I was just in San Diego. This ship is sitting in the harbor there. This is Monsoor's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Monsoor literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room have ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. And if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah, that's actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday night. It's on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku, and just look for NRB TV on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Wilmington right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, if you go to our website at that time, you'll see the show. We're also on radio every Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern. Now, I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday. I get it. So you're not going to listen to it then. That's okay. It's podcasted. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it based on our website, crossexamine.org, as Tom said there a couple of minutes ago. We have 2 podcasts, actually. They're 2 a week. One drops on Friday. The other drops on Tuesday. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight if we can get through all this. The first question is, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. All truth is relative. Well, if there's no truth, quite obviously, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either, right? I mean, of course there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. Would the University of North Carolina at Wilmington even exist if there was no truth? I mean, aren't you supposed to come here to learn truth? Isn't that the point? I don't think you're paying 30, 40 grand a year to learn opinions, I hope, right? And by the way, if there was no truth, could you ever catch someone in a lie? The lies presuppose truth. So yes, truth exists. We'll cover that first. Second question, does God exist? We're going to look at 3 arguments for the existence of God. There's more than 3, but we're going to look at 3. And these arguments are not in the Bible, or they actually are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. You can know that God exists without any reference to any religious work. People knew there was a God long before there was any written revelation. Obviously, God must exist for Christianity to be true. Third question, are miracles possible? Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. And we just pointed out nobody's seen a resurrection, so how can we even believe in something like Christianity? Well, I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, atheists are actually admitting the evidence for. We'll get to that tonight. And then the key question is the New Testament true when it comes to one particular event in the ancient world? The Christianity stands or falls on this event. If this event occurred, it's true. If this event didn't occur, it's false. What's the event? Anyone? The resurrection. Look, if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, if you're a Christian, your faith's in vain. As the Apostle Paul himself said in his first letter to the church at Corinth, chapter 15, he said, if you believe this and it isn't true, your faith's in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. It's actually based on an historical event. And from that point, as we talk about in the book, you can go and show the entire Bible's true. But we're just going to give you an overview from 10,000 feet. And we're going to start right here at point one. Does truth exist? Seahawks, you ready to go? One guy. Beautiful. All right, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. Seahawks. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle the truth. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. All right, let's try it again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that here at the university? You can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here all night, the next few minutes, I think, is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you now. You know why I didn't know it? Because I never had a course in logic. How many people here have had a real formal course in logic? Anyone? Keep your hands up. You see these people here? These are the homeschoolers, right? Right here, okay? Yeah, we don't teach logic in public school. If we did, things would be a lot better. In public school, we're not teaching kids how to think. We're teaching them what to feel. And that can be dangerous. Look, emotions make life fun, but logic makes life safe. And if you start believing and following your emotions without any logic, you're going to hurt yourself and others probably pretty quickly. So what we're going to talk about now is something called the law of non-contradiction, a fundamental law of all logic, which says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Right? We can't both be at University of North Carolina at Wilmington and not be at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington at the same time and in the same sense. Right? We're either here or we're not. God can't both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. It's one or the other. And what this law of non-contradiction will help you do is discover statements that are false. That's important. Why? Because there are so many false statements and slogans and ideas you hear in our culture that come right across your iPhone or your Droid. And if you start believing in these statements, one day you're going to smack up against reality and it's going to hurt. And so this law of non-contradiction will also help you amaze your friends. Why? Because you're going to be able to point out in a very nice way, by asking questions, you're going to be able to point out why their statement is false. So let's show you this by applying it to some of these statements. Suppose someone were to come up to you and say, there is no truth. That's what postmoderns believe. There is no truth. You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yes, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see this is a logically self-defeating statement? It would be like if I said I can't speak a word in English. What would you say if I said that? Hey, you just used English to say it. Or it'd be like me saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one. All right? These are known as self-defeating statements, and they can be identified by this one thinking tactic. Here's the tactic. Turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. See if the statement meets its own standard. See if it violates the law of non-contradiction. If it does, it's false, and you don't have to believe it. So let's do a few more of these. Suppose someone were to say, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Yeah, is that an absolute truth? If you turn the claim on itself, you can see that this statement is an absolute truth claim, claiming there are no such thing as absolute truths. Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Or if somebody says that there's no such thing as absolute truth, you might want to say, are you absolutely sure? Because that's an absolute truth claim. Now, actually, in our culture, it's more often communicated like this. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you have your truth, I have my truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. Right? It sounds so right, doesn't it? It sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? That everybody has their own truth, let's just all get along. There's just one big problem with it. If someone were to say, there isn't the truth, only my truth, and you apply the claim to itself or turn the claim on itself, you can ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is this statement up here just your personal opinion, your own truth? If it is, why should I believe it? But if you're saying this statement up here is the truth, can't you see the first half of the statement says there are no such thing as the truths? Can everyone see this is a the truth statement claiming there are no the truth statements? It defeats itself. It cuts its own throat. It can't be true. I know this is very unpopular in our culture today, but I'm just going to say it. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. If you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say, I have my own math. I mean, imagine if Tom from Ratio Christi said, hey, Frank, tomorrow we need some help around campus. We need to clean some things up. Would you stay an extra day and work as many hours as you can to help us? And no matter how long you help, I'll pay you $10 an hour. You just tell me how many hours you work at the end of the day, I'll pay you. Now, actually, Tom would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. Anyway, but let's suppose I did that. I hung out tomorrow, and I worked for 15 hours all day into the night. And I go to him, hey, Tom, I'm done. He goes, what do I owe you? I said, let's see. I worked for 10 hours, 15 hours at $10 an hour. You owe me $150,000. And he goes, what? I owe you $150,000, not $150,000. And I go, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. He'd go, you're crazy. There's no such thing as your math. There's no such thing as my math. There's just math. Now, parents, I know your kids bring math home sometime, and you go, this isn't my math. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? But look, there's either a right answer or a wrong answer. There's no in between. There's not my math or your math. There's not my truth or your truth. Now, sometimes it's said this way, too. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? It's also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, you might want to say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. Try this. It's true for you, but not for me the next time you get pulled over. Right? Let's suppose you're going 100 miles an hour up Highway 74. You're heading home to Charlotte. That's where I live. You're going 100 miles an hour. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to the car, knocks on the window. You put the glass down. He says, you were going 100. It's easy to get out of a ticket. You simply say, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. You can't give a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 100, that's true for all people at all times in all places when I'm referring to you at that time. It's just true. In fact, maybe we ought to define what truth is. Truth is what corresponds to its referent. If when referring to you when you were going 100, you were going 100. And that's true for everybody at all times in all places when I'm referring to you at that time. It's just true. By the way, same thing is true. If Jesus rose from the dead, that's true for all times, for all people at all times in all places, whether you believe it or not. Of course, if he didn't rise from the dead, it's false, even if you do believe it. It's not my truth or your truth. There's just truth. You know, I ask a lot of Christians, do you think Christianity is true? And most people will say yes. And then I ask them why. You know what they say? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not Jesus rose from the dead or not? I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No. You don't have to believe something to make it true. Oh, how about this? You probably heard this before. There's no truth in anything but science. This is called scientism. Science is wonderful, but there's a problem with this claim. What's the problem? If you turn the claim on itself, what question would you ask? Yeah, can science prove that? Simply say this. Is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that claim? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that in the laboratory. In fact, you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. In fact, when you get a PhD from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, what does the PhD stand for? No, not phenomenally dumb, no. Philosophy of physics, a doctorate in that, or biology, or history, whatever it is. Philosophy, you can't understand the Bible without philosophy. Philosophy is right thinking about reality. In fact, we have a section in the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book on this. Here's the title of the section. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Why do I say that? Because all data needs to be gathered and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. Science doesn't say a word. If you ever hear someone say science says this or science says that, you got to go, no, scientists say that. By the way, you ever wonder why you've gotten such conflicting advice on COVID? You say, follow this. Whose science? It depends on who's interpreting the data and whether they have good data or not. Science doesn't say a word. By the way, this is the same reason there's a dispute between people who say we evolved and others who say, no, we were intelligently designed. Do you know we're all looking at the same evidence and we're coming to different conclusions? Why is that? It could be because, look, if you look at that issue, there's only two possible causes for life. Either it was intelligently designed, an intelligent cause, or it evolved. What else could it be? Intelligence or non-intelligence. However, if you philosophically rule out intelligence before you look at the evidence, which many atheist scientists do, what's the only game in town? It's got to be a natural cause. Is it any wonder they always say it has to be an evolutionary process? Now, maybe they're right. I don't think they are, but maybe they are. However, if you rule out the only other alternative, you're going to always come up with that answer. Is that a result of the evidence or a result of the philosophical presupposition? It's a result of the philosophical presupposition. How about this? You hear this a lot. You ought not judge. And you're a Christian? Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrite? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a second. What's the logical problem with the claim? Yes, next time somebody says you ought not judge, you might want to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Because that's what it is. Or you might want to say, if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? You say, wait a minute, Frank, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. It's right in the middle of his most famous sermon. All right, a few Christians in here, and even non-Christians. I know it's going to sound odd for a minute, but it's true. Just stick with me. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography of Jesus, which we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No, when were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is important, right? It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of books we put under one binding if we didn't have numbers. I mean, if you're a Christian, imagine you go to church one Sunday morning. You don't have numbers in your Bible. The pastor doesn't have numbers in his, and he just opens it up and he goes, let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot. Right? You couldn't do that, right? You need numbers to find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can just take it out and make it say whatever we want. This is why, and some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I leave tomorrow. Okay, I don't care. This is why you Christians should never say that Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. You know Jeremiah 29:11. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in a future. This is on coffee mugs. This is on pillows. This is on birthday cards. This is on posters. And it's not a promise to 21st century Christians. Who is that written to? That was written to the exiles who were forcibly taken out of Judah in 586 BC, taken to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, modern-day Iraq, and God was saying through the prophet Jeremiah to those people that he would prosper them. 70 years later, he would bring them back into the land because he has a plan for them. It's not a promise to us today, it's a promise to them. I always ask people who claim Jeremiah 29:11 as if it's a promise to them. I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as if it's a promise to you? Well, what's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is what God promised to do to the exiles that went to Egypt at that time. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that in a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No, we're taking stuff out of context. And we're doing the same in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Does Jesus just say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite. Notice that's a judgment, you hypocrite. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. And then Jesus talks about don't cast your pearls before swine, which involves a number of other judgments. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, if you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments today just getting over here. And now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. Why am I even here, right? Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge Jesus didn't rise from the dead. They judge there's no objective meaning to life. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's over. It's hopeless. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. Everybody makes judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? In fact, Jesus in John 7:24 said, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You got to make a judgment to be a Christian or not. You have to make a judgment for just about anything you do. I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Many of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was sort of the Jewish ruling council to whom Rome delegated day-to-day legal-making authority. They were the politicians. They made laws. And Jesus went after them. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes. And then he's having an argument with these Pharisees, these religious politicians. In John chapter 8, he's right in the middle of the argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really goes after these religious politicians. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make him a convert, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle, Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How many times have you ever heard anyone talk about those passages? Yet many of you in this room know those passages are true. Why? Because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. Jesus did not come to bring unity. He did in the church, but not unity with the world. You're going to have to take up your cross and follow him if you're going to be a Christian. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you think your friend's going to say, well, who are you to judge? Like, nobody's going to say that, right? I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get mad at you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. Hey, I don't want my evil deeds exposed either, do you? That's why they killed him. In fact, they killed him because he claimed to be God, which was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And he also spoke truth to power, particularly Caiaphas, the high priest. I think Caiaphas knew Jesus was the Messiah. Why? Because as soon as he raises Lazarus from the dead, what does Caiaphas say? It's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. Caiaphas didn't want to lose his job. He had Jesus killed. People always say, why doesn't God show up now? Because we'd probably do the same thing to him. What do you think? So, there's many more of these we could talk about, but we got to move on to the next point. I just want to sum it up all this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? That relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, sadly, many of our high schools and most of our universities have bought into postmodernism. When you think about that, why would you spend a whole ton of money to have some professor tell you the truth that there is no truth? Does that make any sense? In fact, you may know, we go around to a lot of colleges. So far this year, we've been at Florida Atlantic, and last week or a couple weeks ago, I was at Fresno State. A couple weeks from now, we'll be at Ohio State, then Auburn and University of Cincinnati and a couple other schools. And we always set up a microphone. We have it right here. It'll be set up later for Q&A. And I normally ask people who are not Christians a question if they get any hostility at all. And so it's not fair of me to ask the question without me telling you in advance what the question is. So I'm going to tell you right now what the question I might ask you later if you're not a Christian. If you're not a Christian, thank you for being here. But I'm just giving you a heads up. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable you wouldn't believe something that was true? Well, it's not reasonable. It's not a problem in the head, it's a problem in the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God because they want to be God of their own lives. Look, most of us are not on a truth quest, we're on a happiness quest. And we're just going to believe whatever we think is going to make us happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy doing a lot of fun but selfish and sinful things, yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here is over 40, knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? I'm going to do it my way. Yeah, not for long, okay? You keep doing that, you're going to wind up addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you've got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. By the way, this is a picture from an event we had at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. All right? In any event, keep that in mind, because I may ask that question later. And if you have Christians in here, if you have non-Christian friends, you might want to ask them that question. And it's fair for them to ask you the opposite question. If Christianity was false, would you stop believing it? I hope so. Why would you believe something that wasn't true? Your faith's in vain if it's not true. All right, next question. We know truth exists. Is it true that God exists? And I mentioned there are 3 arguments we're going to look at. There are many more arguments for God, but we don't have time to go through them all, and we're going to abbreviate these. But the first argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe, and says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, then there must be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll see that here in a few minutes. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, but it's the argument you've all known since you were a very small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to walk into a grammar school and shoot 9-year-olds, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That would just be your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against some school shooter's opinion. Well, we know those issues aren't just a matter of opinion. We know those things are really wrong. If they're really wrong, there must be a standard of really right that we're obligated to obey. That standard can only exist if God exists. Now, we'll get to that argument later, but we got to start right here at the cosmological argument. You got to admit it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Come on. Some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, oh, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago. Some of you may know Hawking was sort of a medical miracle. He got ALS like 40 or 50 years ago and somehow lived that long after that. Normally, it takes you out in a couple of years. Anyway, Hawking had a brilliant mind, and at one point he said this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data, that space-time and matter literally came into existence. Once there was no space-time and matter, and then boom, it came into existence. Now, we're not going to look at the evidence for this tonight. Why? Number one, we don't have time. And number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number 3, it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. What is controversial is what caused the universe to come into existence. So we're going to look at that here in just a second, but I do want to show you one piece of philosophical evidence which I think is indisputable, which shows that the universe had to have a beginning. You know, science is tentative. Science can change, but I don't think this philosophical argument would change. Here's the argument I want to just briefly show you. Here's this timeline. There's yesterday, there's day before yesterday, there's last week. Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. Here's my question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? No, why not? You guys are sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. Wah, 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 wah. Because, well, not, yeah, there is a tomorrow, but even think about it the other way. Because if there were an infinite number of days before today, would today ever get here? No, because you'd always have to live another day before you got to today, if there's an infinite number of days, right? So there must only be a finite number of days before today, because today is here. I know this can give you intellectual constipation. It's hard to think this way. In other words, if the past were infinite, today could have never arrived. But here we are. It's today. So there can only be a limited number of days before today, which means time had a beginning. And what could have caused time? Only something timeless. If you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No, which means you don't have a cause, which means nobody caused whoever caused time. That's the uncaused first cause. All right? Now, this is called the Kalam cosmological argument for you apologetic nerds out there, that there had to be a beginning to time. But let's just jump to the bottom line. What could have caused that? If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? What do you think? Yeah, number two. Number one, which some atheists say is true, that no one created something out of nothing, has no miracle worker. Number two has a miracle worker. Someone created something out of nothing. It is a miracle, but number one has a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. By the way, do you believe, or do you know, have you thought about this, that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in this and others, but atheists believe in at least one miracle. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. Guys like Lawrence Krauss, who taught for years at Arizona State. He wrote a book, A Universe from Nothing, where he tries to explain how the universe can come into existence out of nothing. He failed miserably at it, but he tried. No. In fact, here's a question you might ask. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? Why do you exist? Why do I exist? Why do peaches exist? Why do Seahawks exist? They don't, actually. Except you. You guys are Seahawks, right? Is there such a bird as a Seahawk? Oh, it's the osprey. Okay, well, ospreys exist. Why does anything exist if there's no God? So you might want to ask that question. Now think about this. If space, time, and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? You know, some atheists will say, well, we don't know what caused it. Ah, okay, but you're admitting something caused it, right? What must be the nature of the cause that created space, time, and matter? It would seem only something outside of space, time, and matter could have created it. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity doesn't decide to do anything. Gravity doesn't say, if Turek drops that thing one more time, I'm not going to pull it to his hand. No. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. You have to have someone make a choice to create something out of nothing. Also, the being would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say God. Well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. I mean, this could be Allah at this point, or some other theistic god. But if we keep going through the evidence and we discover that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,990 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet. This one argument gives us 6 attributes, which could be the Christian God, but we don't know if it's the Christian God yet. We got to keep going, all right? Now, the second argument is the argument from design. And there are 2 aspects to this argument. The universe appears to be designed, and you appear to be designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned to support life here on Earth. In other words, if you were to change any one of a number of factors virtually imperceptibly about our universe, either the universe wouldn't exist, or if it did, it couldn't support life. And atheists even agree with this. Stephen Hawking famously said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If you change the expansion rate at the very beginning, that infinitesimal amount, none of us are here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary argument for this. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve by chance, whatever that means, to this rate. It started at the right rate. Seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate precisely what it needed to be for us to be sitting here today. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. Now, what's 1 in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. So let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. And do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Then take all those piles of dimes, put them into one big pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, and ask him to randomly pick 1 dime. The chance that he would pick that 1 red marked dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. There's no chance he's going to pick that dime. This is the kind of math you have to do to see how fine-tuned the universe is. You say, well, maybe it happened by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do a thing. When scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, there's only 2 possible explanations for that, for this value. It was either designed or it wasn't designed. What makes more sense? It was designed. Now, this is just a couple of about a dozen of these factors about our universe. Change any one of them in this very imperceptible way, we don't exist. And there's probably about 100 or more that have to do with our solar system. That if you would change the solar system slightly, we wouldn't exist. In fact, let's take a look at the solar system here for a second. Here we are, 3rd rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away from the sun, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is? That's a lie. It's way too hot here in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If the size and distance of the moon from us was any different, we wouldn't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Anyone know? Yeah, it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. Its gravitational force is so strong, it's like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, these dark marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Same thing is true with Saturn. In fact, you want to see the size of the planets by size order? Here they are. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then? You bigots. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here. See it? Here's the sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here. Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And this is in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. These stars are inside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. You remember when the space shuttle was, we used to have a space shuttle? You know how fast the space shuttle was going when it was in orbit? It was going at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle, right? 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy, an average distance away 30 trillion miles. How long do you think it would take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah, someone over here had it right. You read the book. It would take you 201,450 years to go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, going 5 miles per second. That's crazy. And if you could go light speed, how long would it take? You know what light speed is? 186,000 miles per second. It would take us almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. I mean, think about this. If our solar system was a quarter with the sun in the middle and Pluto on the outer rim, you know where the next nearest star is? It's like 2 football fields away. And it took us 9 years just to get to Pluto. We're not going anywhere in space. It's just too far, and it's too dangerous. In fact, what I'm about to show you now is a little bit disturbing, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Imagine we do figure out light speed. We go to another planetary system. We plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that little video, and then she smiled just a little bit, and she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now notice what the psalmist says about God's love related to the heavens. He says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." How high are the heavens above the earth? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope has helped us discover that. About 20 years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they trained Hubble on this spot for about 11 days of exposure time. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. I don't know if you can see this, but along the bottom of this slide here, those are mountains. This is the southern hemisphere. I'm going to show you the little video they made as a result of this investigation. There's no audio, it's just video. And what you're going to see when I start this is you're going to see the constellations come up, and then we're going to zoom out to that 1/26 millionth of the sky spot. This is in the public domain. You can Google this and find it. Again, Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You guys ready? Here we go. There are the constellations. Now let's go see what Hubble found. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, each of them with billions of stars of their own. So how many stars are there in the entire universe then? If you find 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, how many stars are there in the whole universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from just one star to another star inside our galaxy going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. By the way, I never want to hear any Seahawk ever again use the word awesome unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video. No! What word are you going to say for this? But we have a problem here. If this is supposed to demonstrate the infinity of God, his infinite attributes, and it is, we're in trouble. Because that means God is infinitely just. And if he's infinitely just, and none of us have been infinitely just, then he has to punish us because he's infinitely just. Otherwise, he wouldn't be infinitely just. So what does he do in order to not punish us? He's also infinitely loving. I only showed you the first half of the verse. Here's the second. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. How has he done this? The only way he can do this and not punish us is to find an innocent substitute who volunteers to take our punishment on himself. Where can he find an innocent substitute? Not in any one of us, because we're all unjust. He's the one that has to come to earth, add humanity to his deity, live the perfect life, have the very creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment on himself. This is why Jesus is the only way. It's not an arbitrary claim. There's just no other way an infinitely just God can allow unjust creatures like you and me to go unpunished unless he punishes an innocent substitute. And where's he going to find an innocent substitute? Not in any one of us. This is why Paul says in his great letter to the Romans, God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. It's not an arbitrary claim. Now, when you think about a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths. And it will take you over 200,000 years just to go between two of those stars. Does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, the heavens were made for you. And here's the second part of the teleological argument. You're designed. This is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat 300 million others out. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order, and your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order, and when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is whose morality will be legislated. And by the way, I don't want to legislate my morality. I don't want to legislate your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Look, if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, hang on, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle discovered something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be someone directing it. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But if it's properly nourished, it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD, and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. All of nature's going in a direction. By the way, I'm so tired of seeing some atheists mischaracterize Aquinas and Aristotle. They're not talking about the Big Bang cause we talked about. In fact, Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal. Aristotle and Aquinas are talking about a cause right now that you need. A cause that keeps everything going in a direction. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing the music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over. Same thing is true with the universe. God creates the universe, then he creates the natural laws that govern it, and he creates you and sustains you and the natural laws that govern it. If he were to pull his hand away, the universe would go out of existence. You ever ask yourself, why are these orderly natural laws the way they are? Why do they do the same thing over and over again? Because they're orderly, because there's an orderly mind behind them keeping them going. This is why you need God to do science, because the universe is orderly. This is also why the Apostle Paul came along and said, in him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. So again, it's not a historical cause, it's a right now cause. Now, there's more in the book Stealing from God on that. We don't have that here, but if you want to go further, you can. But we got to move on to our final argument for God, and that is the moral argument. And perhaps the easiest way to communicate this is to ask you this question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. How do you know that? This is the interactive portion of the program. How do you know that? What do you have to know the touchdown's better than the pick six? Not just the rules. Not just the outcome. The purpose. You got to know the purpose of the game. If you know the purpose of the game, then you can say a touchdown is better than the pick six because the touchdown gets you closer to the purpose where the pick six takes you further away. If there were no purpose to the game, you could not know one play was better or worse than another because you have no standard by which to measure these plays. Now notice, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the teams play, they show up on the field. What's this? Are we at Thursday? It's Thursday night, right? There's some Thursday night game going on right now. And whoever's on the field right now, they're not making up the purpose. They're not making up the rules. That comes from outside the game. Where does that come from? It comes from a competition committee and the owners. And every year they may tweak the rules a little bit. But the rules of football are arbitrary. But the rules of life are not arbitrary. They come from outside the game. They come from the creator, the designer, and he gives us purpose. If there is no creator, no designer, you can't say this is a good way to live and this is a bad way to live because you have no standard by which to judge whether it's good or bad. There's no purpose. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. Why? Because there's no standard of right. Who's to say what they did was wrong? That would be just your opinion. If there is no God, love is no better than rape. Obviously, you might like love better, but that's just a preference. It's not objectively good or bad. It just is if there's no purpose to life. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Have you noticed that we seem to be making up rights in this country every 10 minutes? And many of the people who are suggesting they have these new rights are atheists. There are no rights unless God exists. It's just your opinion. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say government. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And governments instituted among men to secure these rights. The Declaration of Independence was Jefferson's way of saying, George, you're not legislating morally, you're legislating immorally. You're not securing our rights, so we have a right to a new government. You don't get your rights from government. Government is just supposed to protect your rights. Rights come from the Creator. If there is no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. It's just your opinion, but we know they are wrong. In fact, if there is no God, religious people have never done anything wrong. If you're a Christian, what objection do you get to Christianity most of the time? What's one of the most popular objections to Christianity? Yeah, you guys are hypocrites. You don't live up to your own standards. You know, when somebody says that, you might want to say, you know what? You're right. We don't. But you've just given evidence for God. Because why is hypocrisy wrong if there's no God? Also, we admit we're not perfect. That's why we need a Savior. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need a Savior. Now, how many people know someone, maybe it's even you, know someone who's not a Christian because so-called Christians have treated you poorly? Can I see your hands? Yeah, most of us know somebody. It might even be us. Dr. John Dixon, who teaches at Wheaton College, asks you to ask people who have this problem this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, you don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Now, a number of years ago, I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens. How many people know who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And he wrote this book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, which is a fun way of saying religion's evil. We'll see in a minute that religion can't be evil unless God exists, because there's no right or wrong unless God exists. But in any event, the truth of the matter is religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. Look, I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But if I could, I wouldn't need a Savior. In fact, during the second debate, and that was a picture from our second debate at the college in New Jersey, during our second debate, I said, Christopher, much of what you say in your book is true. Religious people have done evil, but you're kind of proving our worldview. We admit there's evil, and we've done it, and that's why we need a Savior. In fact, I said to him, look, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. And when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. Of course we're all sinners. That's why we need a Savior. That would be like saying I can't go down to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people there. Well, that's why they're there. They're trying to get in shape. Of course. And by the way, if there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. Why? Because there's no standard. And are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful how you answer this. No, Christians are commanded to be loving. See, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And so you can't tolerate evil. If you tolerate evil, you're not helping them. You're an enabler. Unfortunately, in our culture, we think love means approval. If you love me, you'll approve of everything I do. Now, parents, you know this isn't true. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's all of us then. Look, if your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? No, parents need to stand in the way of evil, not enable it. Love doesn't mean that you approve of everything somebody wants to do. Love means you seek what's best for the other person, and that means you often need to stand in the way of evil. And when you don't stand in the way of evil, you're not helping them, you're hurting them. In fact, Thomas Sowell, the 93-year-old economist, said this. He's brilliant, as you know. When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. And too often we tell our loved ones what they want to hear so they don't get mad at us. We're not helping them, we're helping ourselves when we do that. That's not love, that's enablement. Finally, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there is no God. Why? Because if there's no purpose, nothing's right or wrong. And if there's no standard of good, nothing's right or wrong. And actually, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist. He went through World War I. His best friend was shot in World War I and killed. And he said, there can't be a good God. There's too much evil, too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany. He realized his argument backfired on him. And he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. Here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. You wouldn't know something was immoral unless you knew that something was moral. In fact, evil only exists if good exists. Evil is like a parasite in good. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Come on. Doesn't exist. Or we could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Now you can ask, why does God allow certain evils? We'll save that for the Q&A. But you can't say he doesn't exist, because nothing would be evil unless a standard of good existed, and what we mean by good is God's nature. See, evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Now, let's sum our three arguments up here. From the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. From the design argument, we also see that he's intelligent, and we get some evidence as well that he is sustaining the universe. And then from the moral argument, we see that this being is also morally perfect. Now, from these three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and is moral. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. Now, you don't know this is Jesus, but it could be. In fact, if someone ever asks you, how do you know that God exists? I think you ought to say, I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, that's the effect. There must be a cause, a creator. If there's design, that's the effect. There must be a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on my heart, that's the effect. There must be a cause, a moral lawgiver. If I have the capacity to think and know what's going on outside my skull, reason, that's the effect. I must reason back to a cause, a great mind. If there's evidence a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. There must be a cause. Who could raise somebody from the dead? Only somebody like God, Jesus, if he is God. So you're always reasoning from effect to cause. Even if you think you have some sort of spiritual experience that God has somehow come to you, you're doing the same thing. You're saying the experience is the effect and the cause is God. This is what scientists do. They reason from effect back to cause. Now, the next question is, how do we know that this cause is the God of the Bible? And for that, we got to go, are miracles possible? Now, you're probably looking at your watch going, how's he going to finish this? We're running out of time here. This is the shortest one. It's easy to show that miracles are possible. Unfortunately, a lot of people think they're impossible, like Noah and the ark. All right, Christians, you Christians in here, can we agree on one thing? Noah and the ark is crazy. Admit it, crazy. And resurrections, I already asked you, how many have seen someone rise from the dead? Nobody said yes. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe in something none of us have ever seen. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what's the deal with Jonah? Can you actually believe that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, it's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Here's the interesting thing. Even atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. Of course, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? It's got to be something spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. And if God can create the whole show out of nothing, can he raise Jesus from the dead? Of course he can. Can he do the Noah miracle? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. If God can create the whole show out of nothing, he can do any of these things inside the universe. Now, a lot of people here might say, well, I've never seen a miracle, so I can't believe in one. First of all, you're living in a miracle. You might want to consider that. This universe is a miracle. But secondly, you might say, there's a lot of things that you believe in that you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? No, it's not something you see. You may have been treated justly or unjustly, or seen other people treated justly or unjustly, but you don't see it directly. It's immaterial. It's an immaterial virtue, grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love, and everyone believes in love. In fact, in the second debate with Hitchens, some student at the College of New Jersey asked Christopher this question. Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So he eventually said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have it, but today I got it. No, love is not a chemical. It's an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. It's a choice to seek what's best for the other person. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, there it is. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. And as I just mentioned, we know God by his effects. You've never seen George Washington. Yet you believe in him. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a man who lived from 1732 to 1799. You've never seen Jesus either. But as we're about to see, there's evidence he actually did what the New Testament says he did. So you ought to believe, if the evidence is good, that he did rise from the dead. You're always reasoning from effect back to cause. And by the way, do you realize that no miracles need to have occurred since the first century for Christianity to be true? There could be no miracles since then and Christianity would still be true. I think there have been miracles since then. In fact, Craig Keener, a brilliant researcher at Asbury Seminary, wrote a hernia-inducing 2-volume set on modern-day miracles. It's like 1,100 pages. But even if he's wrong about all that, as long as Jesus rose from the dead and the apostles did what they did, Christianity's true. And by the way, miracles, if they do occur, you shouldn't see many of them. Why? Because if they happened all the time, they wouldn't be miracles. Miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. In fact, that's what miracles are for in the Bible. They're to show you that so-and-so speaks for God. And there's long periods in the Bible where there are no miracles. Why? Because there's no prophets. There's no new revelation. The miracles were to confirm the message. The sign was to confirm the sermon. I mean, imagine if people rose from the dead routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. Right? No, if it were to happen in all the time, they wouldn't be considered miracles. So they have to be rare to get our attention. So miracles are possible. The greatest miracle has already occurred. The next question, the final question is it true that Jesus actually rose from the dead? Because if he rose from the dead, then he is God, and the creator of the universe is him, and the scriptures are true, and we have a Savior. If he didn't rise from the dead, forget everything I just said. Now, in the book, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10. We've got time for just 2, and I'm going to abbreviate them. The first one is the fact that there are embarrassing stories in the text. Historians know if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to invent details that embarrass you. You might invent details that make you look good, but you won't invent details or stories that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad, to embarrass yourself? Now, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good. You won't lie to make yourself look bad. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament, and by the way, the Old Testament writers did the same thing. They filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories and details they never would have invented. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Peter, the leader of the apostles, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, "Hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan"? What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, this doesn't look good. I'm the leader here. And then Peter says, "Lord, I'll never deny you." What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. That's right, ladies. You can give yourselves a hand, right? I didn't run away like you sissy pants men did. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was there, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write down, let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. John said, "Get out." Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, "We'll be back." No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then we marched right down there on Sunday morning, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. They had no motive to make it up. In fact, one of the women was a formerly demon-possessed woman, Mary Magdalene. Gee, what a great, credible witness you got there. I actually had a lady come up to me once and she said, "Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he wanted to get the story out." I said, "That is an excellent point. I had not thought of that." Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, "Hey, hon, what happened?" "Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. Nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner?" He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know the end of the biography we call the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus takes his disciples up on a hill in Galilee and gives them the Great Commission? This is the climax, chapter 28. Jesus has all his disciples there, and he says, "Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations." Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, as they're standing there, and he's given the final instructions, verse 17 says this about the disciples. Some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them. It's like they're standing there going, "You see that guy over there? Yep, that guy over there is Jesus." "Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago." "No, I'm telling you, it's him." "Look, Jesus is dead. The Romans know how to kill people. It's him." It can't be. They whipped him. They put nails in him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. He's dead. I'm telling you, it can't be him. It is. It isn't. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. His own family thinks he's out of his mind. In Mark chapter 3, they think he's nuts. They want to come and seize him and take him home. That's embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, after Jesus appeared to him, dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem 30 years after the resurrection. There's no Bible verse that tells us this. It's Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was probably in Jerusalem at the time. But before Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't think his own brother was God. Only after the resurrection did he. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did James. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented that? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew, when he put the genealogy together, said, "You know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in here, Rahab, Tamar." No! That's embarrassing. In fact, there's a lot of embarrassing people in the Messiah's bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, Judah, not a good guy. He's the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery in Egypt, and then he slept with Tamar, his daughter-in-law. Gee, what a great guy. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then. Bathsheba's in there. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he doesn't even mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who was Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. He's telling the truth, but it's embarrassing. You want the ultimate no-spin zone? Read the Bible. You will never see this kind of stuff in Egyptian history or any. There's none of this embarrassing stuff out there. They exaggerate their victories. Whereas the Bible continually tells the truth about all the stupidity and sinfulness of the Jews and the apostles. They're not making it up. And then Jesus is hung on a tree. If you want to have a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Why? Because that man is under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin that we put him under. Deuteronomy 21:23 says, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. By the way, for you Bible students in here, what are the two trees you see in Genesis? What are they? Tree of life, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Go all the way to the end of the book, Revelation. What tree do you find? Tree of life. You know there's a tree right in the middle? The tree they hung Jesus on. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The only way we're going to have access to the tree of life again is through the tree they hung Jesus on, his sacrifice. With that, we're never going to make it. One more reason is the fact that there are excruciating deaths. These people who were in a position to know whether Jesus really did rise or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. Now, before we go any further than this, you need to realize that all of the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Jewish people who believed in Yahweh. They already thought they were God's chosen people. Luke is the only Gentile. Why would these men who thought they were God's chosen people and thought that a man claiming to be God was blasphemy, and thought nobody would rise from the dead until the end of time, why did they suddenly say, oh yeah, this guy claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless it really happened? In fact, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had risen from the dead? Well, first they got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First we get kicked out of the synagogue, then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get the question a lot, maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes. They are not eyewitnesses, but they do corroborate the basic story. They're in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what is often underneath that question? An illicit assumption. What's the illicit assumption? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because, see, they were biased. They were Christians. You can only trust the non-Christian writers to tell us what really happened. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize how silly that objection is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, who's a cold case homicide detective. He's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders decades old. Jim is also a Christian who took his homicide skills and applied them to the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. If you go to coldcasechristianity.com, you can get the book there wherever you get books. It's a great book. Anyway, Jim says, anytime he has found someone he knows has been murdered, he says, I know that that guy's dead for one of only 3 reasons, or a combination of these 3. I don't need to track down 1,000 motivations. I just need to look at one of these 3 motivations. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those things are so good that they'll drive people to murder to get them. In fact, if you think about it, those are the same 3 reasons any of us sin: to get sex, money, or power. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. But they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And so Jim says, if you're going to say these Bible-believing Jews invented all this, you got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look. Did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got persecuted. They had the opposite of power. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motive to make this up. And then why would they die for a known lie? Now you might say, Frank, time out. If you're going to say martyrdom is somehow evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say martyrdom is also evidence for Islam? No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had resurrected from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. Now, what I'm about to say is going to freak some of you out if you believe the Bible's inerrant like I do, but stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus, not because they read about it in a book. In other words, Christianity did not begin with a book. Christianity began with an event, the resurrection. There would be no series of documents that we put under one book, written by Jews in the first century, claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and rose from the dead. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents unless Jesus rose from the dead. Now, there's more to be said on this, but we don't have time at this point. Let's sum it all up. Does truth exist? If someone says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? 3 arguments. First argument, cosmological argument. Second argument, teleological argument. Third argument, moral argument. From those 3 arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? The greatest miracle in the Bible is Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, and even atheists are admitting that the universe had a beginning. Is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? We just looked at 2 out of 10 reasons. One is embarrassing, and the other is excruciating. By the way, we get the word excruciating. It means out of the crucifixion, out of the cross. And there are many other lines, but we don't have time to get into it now. If you want the entire PowerPoint presentation, text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582. Just evidence, the word. No spaces before, no spaces after. Even people out there in internet land can do the same thing. If you do that, I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format and about 5 other ones as well. We also have some books and DVDs out on the table. Of course, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. By the way, I want to point out all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay, just so you know. We've got the book. We've got the DVD set. That's 7 hours, and you can get workbooks that will also take you through it in a curriculum-type way for small groups or homeschools or even high schools. And then this brand new book my son and I wrote, Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. Yes, I know Hollywood puts out a lot of junk, but you would be shocked to learn that the greatest movie franchises of the past 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told. Whether it's Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Iron Man, Batman, Captain America. Check out that book. Also, we're teaching online courses now. We have about 25 online courses. I teach many of them. I'm going to be starting a new one. We're going verse by verse through the book of Galatians starting later this month. Just go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see it there. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Have you guys signed up for UTwitface yet? We're also on Instagram and TikTok, by the way. The I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast is on twice a week. Don't forget we're on TV on Wednesday nights. And if you don't do anything else, just download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine. It's got the TV show on there. It's got the podcast on there. It even has a quick answer section. So if you're a Christian and you're having lunch with somebody and they say something you don't know how to answer, all you need to do is take out your phone and go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? You got the answer right there, all right? All right, last thing before your questions. It's true. So what? So what if it's true? Well, the best news of all is that someone actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy to earn than a golden trident. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5%. those that do make it through wear that trident with pride because it is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your gender identity, or put your identity in your bank account, or put your identity in another person, or do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, that none of those things are ultimate? That you can lose all those things? If you put your identity in your gender identity or your sexual preference, what happens when you're no longer sexually preferred? Or what happens when you can no longer perform sexually? You no longer have an identity? If you put your identity in another person, and God forbid that person dies or leaves you, you no longer have an identity? You put your identity in your bank account or your job. What happens if you lose your job? You no longer have an identity? You know, you can lose all these things. You know, the one thing you can't lose is Jesus. He's eternal. Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. He's achieved your identity. And he proved he did by rising from the dead, which means you will rise from the dead one day soon. The only question is to where. If you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. But if you receive your identity, God has done all the work, and you have something that's eternal. That's why John says in his biography, the first chapter, he has given you the right to become a child of God by receiving what he's done. And if you've never received that, why wouldn't you? It's free and it's eternal. You know, I have a friend who's 70 years old. She's a saint. She works in Starbucks, not for the money, but for the ministry. And there's a couple of young ladies trying to transition in her Starbucks. And she says they sit in the back on TikTok, and they go through video after video trying to affirm what they're doing is good and right. They need constant affirmation because they're afraid what they're doing isn't. And my friend says, you know, I went to high school 50 years ago, and I'm still paying for some of the decisions I made 50 years ago. But what I did pales into comparison what you're doing. The decisions you're making now may sterilize you forever. You may not think you want kids right now, but what happens when you hit 23 and you do? This is not your salvation. You get your salvation by receiving what Christ has done, not by trying to achieve anything. So now we're going to go to your questions, but before we do, I want Tom to come up. Tom, we don't want this just to be an event. We want, if you're a student here and you're interested in this kind of material, to have places you can go to learn more about this kind of thing and fellowship with other people. So Tom, tell us where Ratio Christi meets and when they meet.
So we meet on Monday nights at 7 o'clock. We meet, this semester we've been bouncing back and forth between two different locations.
Can you hear him? All right, just stand close to me. Go ahead.
So we meet at Monday nights at 7 o'clock. We've been bouncing back and forth between Congdon and Azalea upstairs in Fisher. That's for Christians, non-Christians, whoever wants to come and have these kind of conversations. We also, Grant Forrester is on staff here. If you have a high school student that is interested in having these kind of conversations, he'll be at the Ratio Christi table in the back. He'll be wearing a hat, and talk to him and you can find out how to get plugged in. Also, we have a table back there. Any questions you have, feel free to go back there. Frank has his table with his books and materials there. And then we also have a table for the Colson Fellowship, which is a Christian worldview program in which you can learn more about the Christian worldview as well as other worldviews and how to have good conversations with those in our culture who might believe differently than you do.
Tom, what's the website? Is there a website for UNC Wilmington, Ratchet Christie?
Well, for UNCW's particular, we have a QR code you can scan. It's a link tree that'll take you to our Instagram, our Facebook page. We don't have a website per se.
Facebook page, okay.
Yeah,
Instagram.
Facebook, Instagram.
So that's on the table?
That's on the table.
Just go to the table, friends.
Yeah.
If you're interested in going further with this, that would be great. Just get that information. Thank you so much, Tom. All right, we're going to go to questions now, and we'll try and get this mic working so you can hear everybody. But no one likes to ask the first question, so we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question right here, and there's people watching on the internet, so you have to come to the mic, otherwise nobody will hear you. And Manny here will figure out the mic. So let's go to questions. Oh, come on, someone has to have a question. Once the first person comes, then we're all set here. You can also give us a survey, by the way, if you don't mind. If you text the word event, no spaces on each side, to that same phone number, you can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, so we can improve it. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Joseph Frank, thank you.
Joseph, yes, sir, go ahead.
During COVID, there was a couple lights, and you were one of them.
Oh,
yeah.
Well.
Got me down to North Carolina, thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
The Holy Spirit's been trying to get me to figure this out with him throughout the week, and I couldn't quite get there. He just said, get up and start. So we want to invite people into the kingdom, but it doesn't seem like we can teach them about sin. And so...
Well, if people resist the idea of sin, you might ask them if they think there's anything wrong with the world. Because I've yet to meet a person, regardless of their worldview, that says, yeah, everything's fine with the world. Everybody agrees there's something wrong with the world. No matter what side of the political aisle you're on, you think certain things are just and other things are unjust. So everybody has some sort of concept of good and bad, right and wrong. And so I think you can just ask a few questions and they're going to have to admit, yeah, I think that's wrong and I think this is right. So,
if I may, it's kind of a rebuke to Christendom, because I think it's failing with us to be able to lay that out. And for example, transgenderism, things like this are very difficult topics.
Sure.
But on a college campus where probably a lot of people are fornicating, I mean, we've skipped levels. We're down the hallway of sexual sin, and we're trying to bring the light to something like that. But it seems like we've missed a bunch of levels. So.
Oh, yeah. You know, Christians can point their fingers at other people, and they're doing other sins. No, but the problem is, if you had to be perfect in order to point out a sin, none of us could. Okay? Jesus is the only one perfect, and he told us what sin is and isn't. And so did his apostles. So we have to call sin out, but we also have to be consistent and say, yeah, I'm a sinner too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's developing, so I'll keep you
yes,
posted.
Of course. Thank you.
Sir.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, Dr. Turek. My name's John, and
John.
I just want to apologize for wearing the shirt.
It's awesome.
I picked it up before the talk, so.
It says awesome on his shirt, by the way.
It was
Go ahead,
predestined. So. Just want to say thanks for your podcast. Thanks for your work. I've been listening to you for 20 years, and one of your podcast episodes saved my life. So I just want to say thanks.
Whoa.
And
thank you.
Of course. And I big one-year Bible guy. Every time I come across the New Testament, obviously there's portions of it that say this isn't in the original manuscript, which I think is very honest. I appreciate that. My question was the one about the woman caught in adultery, only because it's referenced so much. What's your personal opinion on whether that really took place, or if it's possible that it didn't take place, or just kind of wanted to get some further expansion on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you look at your Bibles, there usually will be a note, if you have a study Bible, that this wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. That sure seems like a Jesus story to me, doesn't it? I mean, if that's an invented story, somebody is really creative and has created a story that sounds like Jesus. So I choose to believe that that actually happened. Why it wasn't in one of the earliest manuscripts, I don't know. It could have somehow been inadvertently left out, and when it later was discovered that it should be in there, it was put back in there. Of course, we've lost most of the earliest manuscripts just due to the amount of time that has passed. It could have been in some of the earliest manuscripts, and we just don't have them. So it sure seems like that kind of story is the kind of story that Jesus actually conducted, that he actually did this with this woman caught in adultery. And exactly what he did to the Pharisees was so brilliant as well, right? He who has no sin cast the first stone. Of course, they all start dropping their stones.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Hey, my name's Jake.
Jake, go ahead, sir.
So I just got a couple questions as well as a few comments on sort of the way you're structuring the whole argument stuff here. So you seem to be hinging pretty much, as you said, everything on the resurrection, and the proofs for the resurrection come in a few forms, mostly in like testimony of different people and then the actions that these people take because of their belief. And then you analyze this through multiple ways. So I just would like to go through a couple of these and ask you about them, and then maybe
Sure,
give my thoughts
as
on
long
it.
as there's not too many, because you got a line behind
Sure, I'm
you.
just going to go with two of them. So the first one I want to bring up is the embarrassment test. You sort of refer to it in a few different ways. You call it like the duh test, in reference to how it's like very obvious that nobody would, or like if someone would just write how they're the perfect guy or something like that. Like, do you think it's possible that it could have been that obvious to the people writing this story, that if they wrote themselves as this perfect hero, that it wouldn't be as a compelling story? And I would point to like every other story that's ever been created ever, where like we have protagonists who are imperfect, and that imperfection is what makes them like approachable and believable. Like nobody likes, I guess I'll use like Captain Marvel.
I think it's a very good criticism of the embarrassing story line of evidence if we didn't have other lines of evidence.
Sure.
It doesn't stand alone. I agree with you.
Of course.
But I couldn't go through all the eyewitness testimony. I couldn't go through the fact that it was written down early. I couldn't go through the fact that there's undesigned coincidences in there. I couldn't go through corroboration from external sources. I couldn't go through the prophecies. We just didn't have time.
Yeah.
But if you get the book, you'll see it fits. And if you take any one piece of evidence out, without the others, it's a lot weaker, but you put it all together, you have a very strong argument.
So one more, I guess I have two more that I want to go through super fast. You say like someone isn't willing to die for a lie that they know is false. I guess an example I would bring up where this is very clearly not true is Jewish people or people harboring Jews during the Nazi regime and the Holocaust. When the Nazis came, they asked, hey, do you know where any Jews are? Are you sheltering any? People would say no and die for that because it was a lie. And so it's very clear that people are able to die for a lie that they believe will have greater or will affect an outcome that they believe is greater than the lie that they're creating.
With regard to the Jews, they're doing the right thing to protect innocent people from evil. And they were willing to take the risk in order to save those innocent people from evil. And frankly, maybe they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't.
Sure. So
that's not a parallel to what the New Testament writers did.
The parallel I would draw is that when someone believes that what they believe is correct and or will have greater outcomes than them just telling the truth or whatever, it's very clear that you can martyr yourself for a lie that you know is false. So all this shows
Such as what?
All this shows is that the people who wrote of the testimony or whatever, either they believed that it was true for false reasons, or they believed that dying for that lie would give them, they believed that was the right thing to do for
the right
for
thing to do
reason.
for what?
For any given reason. It doesn't have to be that
But
it was true.
I mean, you can come up with any possibility. What was in their heads. The question is, what possible reason would all the New Testament writers or the apostles die for something that they knew was false?
Maybe that they believed that in doing so they would.
All of them?
Maybe some of them. Maybe others didn't. So when you say like taking out one part of it will make something weaker, when I bring up the embarrassment test, that's sort of the response I would give here. Where just because I can't come up with a perfectly compelling reason why a number of people would do a specific thing doesn't make your argument more or better.
Well, everybody's got to evaluate the evidence
Sure.
for themselves.
Yeah.
But Jake, let me ask you this. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Yeah, of course. Obviously I would. Can I ask like one more question in that same vein, like a response from that question?
Okay, last one.
Sure. I'll be super quick with this one.
And you can go to the back of the line after this. If you
Yeah,
want.
I also have to. I really have to pee, so I might go do that too.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's say. So I'm assuming you use the Bible to interpret like moral law, assuming that everything in the Bible is true. You base your like moral beliefs off of Scripture, as it is like one-to-one in Scripture to the objectively correct moral law. I'm just going to make that assumption here. Is that true?
Well, give me the circumstance you're talking of.
So, like the Ten Commandments, like those are like true things that are objectively true, and you follow them to the best of your abilities.
Except, well, yeah, keep holy the Sabbath no longer applies.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
like
yeah.
up until the most recent
sure.
like changes, you follow them to the best you can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say like a new scripture was uncovered, and then there's a new council of Trent or whatever council goes about examining a scripture and implementing it if it is found to be legitimate. And this new scripture says that it is it's like morally good to beat your wife if she talks back to you. Would you then do that?
You're talking about the Quran. We don't believe in the
No,
Quran.
I'm asking you, if there was a new piece of Christian scripture that had this specific moral commandment, would you then beat your wife? Assuming
Well,
that all the other Christian theologists said, hey, this is found to be accurate,
but
this is consistent.
Here's what you're doing,
would
Jake.
you then do this?
You're giving
Sure.
me a command from God
Yeah.
that we know wouldn't come from God. So I highly doubt that anyone would,
Sure, but
would
what
say
if
this
what
was-
if it did?
There's no what if. You're giving me a hypothetical that isn't hypothetical.
Just
That's
like when
not
you
gonna
asked me,
happen.
what if Christianity were true, would you be Christian? Like, you're doing that
Something
when you
happened
asked
to
me
his
that
mic
question.
again?
Oh.
Manny? My bad. Say something.
Hello.
They're not hearing you, are they?
So that would be like, I would say that you're doing that when you ask me if I would be Christian if it were true.
Well,
That's like
if
the
it were
similar
true, but
level
you
of
see, Jake,
ridiculous
you're
hypothetical.
Okay, but
right?
you're giving me a hypothetical that appears to be so remote that it's not a reasonable hypothetical that
Sure.
all the other scriptures
Sure, but
say
that's
that,
why it's a hypothetical, right?
Okay,
So
hold-
let's say it was true.
Okay, well, we'd have to cross that. We'd have to burn that bridge when we come to it, Jake. Let me just put it that way, okay?
Sure.
All right,
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate
Thank you. Can we get some help on this mic somewhere, Manny? Because it's not working, apparently. Manny? He was here. Is it on? Is Manny still here?
Hello? Hey. Okay. Oh, okay.
All right,
Okay.
we'll work on it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'll repeat. Go ahead.
Okay.
What's your name?
My name's Camden.
Kendon, just get in closer because
Okay.
it's still
Yeah.
the internet can still hear you.
Okay.
It's just the people here who are disadvantaged. Go on YouTube right now. You can watch this. Okay. Good. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, it's like as a Christian, and I'm a sophomore, and I know like myself and others, we've been like praying on like what we should major in and those types of decisions. So I would ask, it's like as a Christian, how do we like hear God when He's like trying to, I guess, like to communicate to us in our lives about like these types of decisions?
Okay. He's asking how do you hear God when He's trying to communicate to us in these decisions. Most of you are going to disagree with what I'm about to say now. I don't think God does that most of the time.
Okay.
I think God communicates through the Bible. I mean, why would He give us a book of Proverbs if He's going to tell us what to do every day? Okay, I know this goes against what most Christians believe, but there's two basic views. There's the traditional view where God gives you little hints and tells you who to marry and where to go to school and, you know, all those kind of things. And you've got to figure out what those hints are and follow them. And there's the wisdom view where God says, I'm just going to give you a moral window in which you need to stay when you make this decision. For example, in marriage, just marry somebody in the Lord. Marry a fellow Christian. It's up to you who you marry. And when you do marry that person, you've created God's will in your life. This is called the wisdom view, okay? As I say, most Christians believe in the traditional view. I believe in the wisdom view. I think it's biblical and it's much more freeing because God just gives you a window and then you can decide. Now, am I saying God never communicates to you? No, he might communicate you outside the Bible, but that's rare, and it's even rare in the Bible. If you read through the book of Acts, there's only a couple times where the Holy Spirit says, do this and don't do this, okay? Now, my friend Greg Kokel at Stand to Reason has written a 3-part article on this. If you want to go further, it's called Does God Whisper? Okay. And so if you type Does God Whisper into Google, Koukl, you can read his argument for this, and I'll leave it up to you whether you think he makes a good case or not. Okay. If you really want to go into this, you can get a hernia-inducing book called Decision Making in the Will of God by Gary Friesen. It's like 40, well, maybe even 50 years old now, but it's the standard work on the topic. Okay. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
I'm Jack.
Jeff, go ahead.
Jack.
Jack, sorry.
Oh, thank you.
You're not amplified.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead, Mary. No,
So-
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So, I agree with you when saying that the disciples being willing to die for their faith is very good evidence for the New Testament. However, there are some critics who would argue that none of the disciples are actually technically martyrs because we have no historical evidence of them being given the chance to recant immediately before their death.
Okay, the question is, he likes the argument that people will die, the apostles died, but there is no historical evidence they were given the opportunity to recant before their death. That's the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the person that has done the most recent work on this and investigation is Dr. Sean McDowell, son of Josh McDowell. And if you go to Amazon, you can find his work, which was his doctoral dissertation, Fate of the Apostles. Now, unfortunately, it's very expensive because they don't make many of these books. But if you read that, you will see that you don't even need, first of all, there's no one who has ever recanted. You know, you would expect if they were doing this for some other reason that at least one of them would have recanted. No one ever recants, and do you need to have...
It's a one-on-one conversation now.
Do I have a brain tumor, or is my... Okay. What were we talking about? Do you need somebody to ask you to recant if they're about to kill you, and you know for decades, that was certainly the case with Peter and Paul, or at least several years, that their physical safety was threatened by being Christians. They didn't need anybody to come up to them and say, would you recant now? You know, when you do look at historical accounts, however, I'm trying to think if it was Pliny the Younger who told someone writing to him, or maybe it was Trajan that told Pliny the Younger, I can't remember the exact scenario, but they basically said if a Christian, offer a Christian the opportunity to recant, and if they don't, then you can kill them. So just because we might not have exact descriptions of how they died doesn't mean that they didn't die, because universally, particularly for the 4 big ones, Paul, Peter, and the 2 Jameses, we have very strong evidence they all died as martyrs for being Christians when they could have saved themselves by not being Christians. So why would they do that? And they were all eyewitnesses of this. Why would they do that if it didn't happen? I think someone who says it didn't happen has to provide a lot of evidence to suggest that they did it knowing it was false and went to their deaths anyway.
May I ask a second question?
Yeah, go ahead. That's it. You're done.
So,
No, go ahead.
So the fact that many of the New Testament documents were written decades later, upwards of up to 90 AD with John's Book of Revelation, does that decrease the credibility of the word for word understanding of it? Like, can we, except for our faith that it was inspired by the Holy Spirit, can we say with any evidence that it is true word for word because it was written decades later?
What was the last part?
Because it was written decades later, are we able to make that
Okay,
claim?
first of all, not all of it was written decades later. There are some people who are saying that the Gospel of Mark may have been written even in the late 30s, certainly the 40s. The gospel, Galatians was probably written about 49 AD. But the important point here is not when the documents were written down, but what sources went into what the writers wrote down. And Dr. Gary Habermas, who is the top scholar in the world on the resurrection, he's been teaching at Liberty University for years. He got his PhD at Michigan State, went through about a 10-year period of doubt himself, but is finishing his magnum opus right now on the resurrection. It's over 5,000 pages long. And Dr. Gary Habermas has found at least 41 creeds in the New Testament that predate when the documents were written down. For example, one of the most famous ones, and it's probably the earliest evidence for the resurrection in the entire Bible, is 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, where Paul says, I received what I'm now passing on to you. And he talks about that Christ died, was buried, rose again, and whom he appeared to. That creed was something that even skeptical scholars like Bart Ehrman up at Chapel Hill here admits is extremely early. In fact, some say it's within months of the alleged resurrection. These creeds were easy to remember because many of the people were illiterate. So they put it in a rhythmic form so people could remember it. Those creeds were later written down, and in 1 Corinthians was written down probably in about 55 AD, but it had circulated since about 33 AD, and it was known as a creed, and everybody knew it. Paul just put it in the letter he wrote to the Corinthians. So the sources are more important than the dates of when the document was written. How about a modern day example? If I right now wanted to write, say, a book about the Vietnam War, and I went and interviewed a lot of Vietnam War veterans, and they gave me their eyewitness testimony, what's more important, their eyewitness testimony or when I wrote it down?
Their eyewitness testimony.
Exactly.
So they're remembering from years later.
What's that?
They're remembering years later, so their word-for-word memory may not be as accurate as it would be the day after they experienced
Well,
something.
it depends. There is something known as an impact event. An impact event is something you will never forget. In fact, only some of you will be able to answer this question, maybe just a few. But how many in this room can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963? Hold your hand up. You see these people, ladies and gentlemen, with their hands up? These people are very old. Okay? November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, yes. I'm 61 years old now. I know, I don't look a day over 60. Actually, when I hit 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, I was 2 years old in 2 days. I'm a toddler. I'm standing in the living room at our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother in my mind right now when she was 26 years old, sitting on that ottoman crying. She's 85 now. But I can see her when she was 26 because it was an impact event. I'll never forget it. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Some of you can remember that. Why can you remember that? Because it was an impact event. Now, 9/11 was what, 22 years ago? And most of you who are old enough can remember something important about that day. But if I ask you where you were 22 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing there? See? So when dramatic events occur, like a resurrection, do you think those people would have remembered it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they would have remembered everything about it because it was such an impact event. Also, when Jesus did a sermon, do you think he did it just once? Do you think I've done this presentation just once?
No, I've listened to several.
Clint over here, he could do this. If I get sick, he could come up here and do it because he's heard it so many times. He does not, you don't have to write it down, right? When you hear something over and over again, you're going to remember it. This is why when people like Bart Ehrman, he'll give an illustration like, would you remember what George Bush said at the 2005 State of the Union address? Of course I don't. But I remember what George Bush said 10 days after 9/11 when he stood up with the badge of that firefighter or that police officer that was killed in the World Trade Tower. I remember that because it was an impact event. And if you either have an impact event or you hear something over and over and over again, you're not going to forget it. And what if it's both? Get an impact event and you hear it over and over again? Yeah. We know what they said. We know what happened. We know what they did, regardless of when they wrote it down. Because it was written down during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. All right? There's much more in the book.
All right. Thank you, Dr.
All right.
Turek.
Thanks, Jack. Yes,
Hey,
sir.
How's it going?
What's your name?
Ben.
Ben, go ahead, sir.
So as someone who engages in debates and discussions on very serious topics, you've likely encountered various challenging situations. Can you share some specific techniques or mental and or spiritual approaches you found effective for keeping your composure and maintaining productive dialogue even when faced with passionate or opposing viewpoints?
Yeah, there are 2 words you need and only 2. Yes, dear. My wife brings far more challenges than any atheist. Let me tell you that. Yes, dear. No, I think what we need to always be aware of, whether you're a Christian or not, is you ought not expect people to agree with you. Why? Look, I'm 61 years old now. When I was 21, I didn't agree with my 61-year-old self. So why should I expect anyone here to agree with me now? All of us are on some sort of journey of spiritual development. We're either moving toward Jesus or away from Jesus. So why should I expect anyone or everyone to agree with where I am right now? I didn't agree with me 40 years ago. Why should I expect you to agree with me now? I shouldn't. I shouldn't expect Jake to agree with me. I shouldn't expect any of you to agree with me. Because we're all different people. I don't know your background. I don't know what you've read. I don't know what you've seen. I don't know what kind of trauma you might have had. I don't know any of that. And so I think when you take that approach with other people, then you can say, okay, I'm not going to why should I get mad? Right? There's no reason for that. We've got to have a dialogue. Getting real mad over it's not going to help. So let me just see where this person's come from. Let me hear your story. Let me figure out why you think what you think. I think Chesterton said something like, I'll probably butcher it if I try and think of it, but he said something like, a bigot is not someone who just can't imagine why somebody disagrees with him, but can't imagine why someone has gotten to believe what they believe now. I'm paraphrasing it. I mean, we're all different. We all have different backgrounds, different upbringings, different educations. So I just think we need to keep that in mind. And that's why the Apostle Paul says, I think in 1 Timothy, where he says, I was an insolent and arrogant man, but God was tolerant with me and showed me favor. He said, he's the worst of all sinners. So that should give you a heart for people that don't agree with you right now. Does that make sense, Ben?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. And don't forget, yes, dear.
Hello.
Yes. Hey, what's your name?
I'm John.
John, go ahead, sir.
My question is pretty straightforward. Do you believe that God has free will?
That God has free will?
Yes, sir.
Well, sure, he can decide to create or not to create, but he's limited by his nature as we are. Like God can't lie or do evil. He can bring judgment, which we might interpret as evil.
Can I make the question a little more specific?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So I was thinking along those very lines, and there's the classic, adage, God can't make a stone so big
Right.
he can't pick it up. And he's limited by his nature. And it seems that the nature of God is kind of inherently to be all-powerful and all-knowing and all-righteous and always act accordingly and do what is best, right? And it would seem that God has some standard of judging what is best that he's applying to situations so that he's acting in accordance with that. And so it seems to me, at least as I'm thinking through it, that there's probably only one best option most of the time. And if God's limited by his nature, he's kind of limited to doing the most perfect thing in each scenario, and that would seem to be in conflict with free will. So I was just wondering your analysis on that reasoning.
Well, the problem is, it depends on what you mean by perfect, because in this world, first of all, for perfect, you need some sort of standard, you need some sort of purpose and goal, right? And
do you think that God has a purpose or goal?
Well, his purpose is for us to know him. The purpose of life is to know him
and there would
to
probably
make him known.
Be something that would get that purpose closer to completion, and he would know exactly what that action is consistently, and he'd have to act accordingly. Or you can get rid of the word he'd have to, but he would want to. That's the only thing that he would do.
I guess we'd have to think about this and try and figure out, given there are billions of people on the earth that he decided to create, is there one perfect outcome? And I don't know if we can make that judgment.
But God
because
presumably
so many
could.
What's that?
But God, God could make that judgment. I'm not trying to make any judgments about what's best for God to do. I'm just saying that God would be able to make the judgment of what's best for the billions of people. And I think in a Christian worldview, that's kind of fundamental.
Right, but the question is, how does he judge, and could we evaluate how he judges? Like, let's suppose, I'm just using a number here. Let's suppose 10 billion people are saved from all time. And there's another universe he could have created where only 9 billion people are saved. But he chooses the 9 billion because the 9 billion wound up in a universe that made them deeper human beings who enjoyed God more than the 10 billion who were very shallow.
He's using a standard to make
He's using some kind of standard, and maybe he's using that, but does he have the free will to judge between those two? And it would seem to me he does.
So he could go against the standard that he's using?
No, he could go against what we think is the right standard, that more people are saved, because he thinks, due to his own will, that saving 9 billion people who are deeper believers is better than saving 10 billion who are not.
Is there?
Perhaps I'm just speculating.
Sure. And
yeah,
I'm just trying to understand this a little deeper. So, there is an option which is preferable to God's eyes and is thus objectively preferable.
Is it preferable due to his nature or just his? Because God did not have to create, right?
Of course.
So if he didn't have to create, why did he create?
But we believe that it's in his nature to create, so he can't go against his nature.
No, he didn't have to create to be God. He had perfect fellowship in the Trinity. He said he created for his glory, but as a loving being, he decided to create in order to share his glory with others, but he didn't have to create. So you know who probably has the answer to this, but I don't know it, is Thomas Aquinas. This is the kind of stuff that Thomas Aquinas would consider. And if you really want to investigate, I don't know whether he has it in the Summa or not, the Summa Theologica. You can find it probably online and see if you can search for this type of question. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. It's an insightful question. I like it, though. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Pia.
Say again?
Pia.
Pia, go ahead. Sorry. I don't have a monitor up here, so it's hard for me to hear. Go ahead, Pia.
For like people that are Christians, like they're supposed to feel more fuller and like connected to God, right? What happens if like they were to feel like not okay and like say they like killed themselves and were suicidal? Are you saying?
I'm sorry. Say that a little louder. I'm having trouble hearing you.
For like Christians, some of them like kill themselves and are like suicidal.
Yeah.
Is there like a promise that says that like everything's gonna be okay though, like better?
Okay, I have to ask you this. Why are you asking that question?
I don't know. I just like thought of it.
Huh?
I just thought of it. Like it was just a question.
Okay, so I want to make sure you're not.
I'm fine. I'm just like asking a question. I promise.
Okay. Let me put it this way. The manner in which someone dies does not determine their eternal destiny. Some of you may know my good friend Mike Adams, who taught here for many years. and some of you knew and loved, he died by suicide. Let me tell you, it can happen to any of us. You reach a low point emotionally, and you think the world is just falling in on you. Was it a sin? Of course it was a sin, but it's not the unpardonable sin. So and if anyone's watching is considering suicide, this is not the solution, okay? It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You need to go and find help from somebody, talk to somebody about this. But I will say the manner in which one dies does not determine their eternal destiny. What determines their eternal destiny is whether they have their sin covered because they've accepted what Christ has done and accepted the free gift of salvation. So, but I say that advisedly for people out there watching, that talk to somebody if you're thinking about this. It's not the solution.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
great.
just asking because, like, I know, like, my friends know people that, like, have committed suicide, and
Yes.
for, like, other people that are thinking about it.
Yes, I know. I would, first of all, we don't know where these people are now, okay? Unless you knew they were believers, we don't know. We don't know what happens in the last moments of death. We don't know if they weren't believers at the very last moment, they threw themselves on the mercy of God, accepted Christ. We don't know. But we just want to prevent people from doing that now. So thank you for your question, Pia. Great question. Yes,
Hi,
sir.
I'm Buck.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
My name's Buck, and
Buck.
those last two questions, I really appreciate yours too, were quite the setup for this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I have an answer for this, but I'm just curious how you would answer the question, God is love, the Bible says. What kind of loving God would allow, whatever the situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, the question is, why does God allow evil to occur, right? And let's point out, before we get into this, that what Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. You don't need Jesus if there's no sin. And if there's no sin, there's no evil. Jesus comes into this world to take evil upon himself. So the solution to the problem of evil is Christianity. That's what the story is all about. But why does God allow a certain thing to occur and not another? We don't know necessarily, but we know why we don't know. We're inside of time, and we can only see a very small aspect of reality. God is outside of time, and he can see the whole show. In fact, one of the things, because I've struggled with this problem, as I know most people who think about it do, why does good God allow certain evil? I already pointed out why it doesn't disprove God, because nothing would be evil unless there was a standard of good, and God is what we mean by the standard of good. But why does he allow certain evils? Why does God allow a baby to die, right? The whole church prays, baby dies anyway. And you say, well, why? And in researching this, I discovered something known as the ripple effect. The ripple effect is that every event that occurs today ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. So I don't know what's going to happen with those ripples because I'm inside of time, but God does know what's going to happen. So maybe a baby dying today sets forth ripples into the future that bring forth a great evangelist 500 years from now who saves millions of people. Can I trace all those ripples? No, but God can. And so that's why we can trust God, because he can bring good from evil. And he can actually bring what appears to be purposeless evil to a purposeful end. In fact, sometimes you can see this in some of the stories in the Bible. One is of Joseph. Remember, his brothers sold him into slavery. I mentioned earlier Judah sold his brother Joseph into slavery. Yeah. And then Joseph rises to prominence after being treated horribly in Egypt. He becomes like the number 2 or 3 administrator there, and he puts a whole bunch of grain aside. And then the very family that sinned against him, that sold him into slavery, leave Israel to escape a famine. They come and they see Joseph, who's in power, and he's got all this food. And as soon as Joseph recognizes them, what does he say? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives. The very people that did evil, that evil rippled forward to help them later and save their lives. Now, we can see it in that story, but it happens all the time in places we can't see it. So that's why I can trust God when I look at inexplicable evil. I go, there's going to be a ripple here somewhere. Does that make sense?
It does. Can I offer what I think is the answer that I have, and you tell me if...
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, cool. So,
false! No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So, as you pointed out, God's purpose is for people to know him, right? So, God is love. He's seeking love. If he wants people to love him, we have to have freedom of choice.
Course.
We have to be able to choose whether or not we're going to love him.
Yes.
And because it's not love if we can't choose.
That's right.
So he gives us that freedom of choice, and we're in a fallen world, and people can make choices that are really, really messed up. And there's those negative ripple effects as well. You know, innocent young driver gets smashed by drunk drivers.
That's right.
This innocent young driver didn't do anything.
Yes.
You know, maybe they were a Christian seeking after the Lord and doing great, amazing things. So what kind of a loving God would allow that? That's the answer I have.
Free will is part of the answer. It's part of what we call a theodicy. How do you explain evil, right? But you might say, well, a baby didn't do anything, right? Why does the baby die? Now, we could trace it back to the ultimate sin of Adam, and it, as you say, created a fallen world. But it wasn't a moral choice of the baby, so the baby got cancer and died. Right. In that case, we can still say that God can provide ripples moving forward. Now, none of this would matter if God didn't exist ultimately, because there's no difference between babies living or dying, not ultimately, because ultimately what's going to happen to all of us? The whole place is going to go to heat death and nothing will remain. So there's no ultimate purpose to life, which means there's no ultimate way to live it rightly or wrongly.
Right.
All right? Thank you, sir.
Cool, thank you.
All right, yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Tracy.
Tracy, go ahead.
This sort of ripples into what I was going to ask you, I guess. About 2 years ago, our son was killed in a motorcycle accident.
Who was?
Our son.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And since then, there's a family member that has, I guess, sort of cemented the idea now that there's no God and all of this. And we've done everything we can to talk to this person about God has a plan, and I know one day we'll see our son again. That doesn't work. So is there any other option, any other road that you can think of that we can talk to him about, since he doesn't even want to talk about God in general?
Well, he may still be, probably still is hurting, so I don't think any answer at this point is going to push him over the edge toward God. It might take more time, but a question you might ask him is that if the God of the Bible did exist and died for you, would you trust in him? And see. He might be resistant now, right? And that's just grief, that's just emotion. My brother-in-law used to say he had a friend like that who was mad at God, and he finally said to him, how can you be mad at somebody that doesn't exist? Right?
Yeah.
So I think it might just be time right now. And just keep praying. And you might plant seeds every now and then, right?
Yeah,
like you already have, saying that if Christianity's true, that we're going to see your brother again. You know, atheism doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
Atheism just takes away the hope. There's no hope if atheism is true.
Yes, that's the point. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Like, how do you expect to see him again if you don't?
Right. Now, just because Christianity gives you hope doesn't mean it's true. I'm not saying that. Right. I'm simply saying that if it is true, then ultimately the problem is solved. But if it's not true, there's no hope anyway.
Right.
So,
okay.
All right?
All right, thank you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, sir. What's your name again?
Zach.
Zach, go ahead.
Yes. Quick question. So I'm a Messianic Jew, first of my family to find Christ, and he found me. And I'm wondering if you have any tips on witnessing to my Jewish family.
Probably the best resource that you could go to is Dr. Michael Brown's website called realmessiah.com. realmessiah.com. Michael Brown, a Messianic Jew, got his PhD in Semitic languages from NYU many years ago, and he is the guy that writes the books that points out that the arguments that Jewish believers give, people who are Jews, not Christians, to say that Jesus isn't the Messiah, Michael Brown has written books to say, no, you're wrong, here's why he is. So it depends on what kind of Jewish person you're talking about. If the person is really a observant Jew and not just someone who's an ethnic Jew, it's just ethnic. Well, then they're not going to care what the Old Testament says, right?
That's where the problem arises.
Well, it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or not. If they're not interested, what do you do, right? How do you deal with apathy? That's the problem.
Yeah, it's more of a cultural thing,
right,
than anything else. So
I would still use that same question if Christianity really were true. If there was a God and he came into this world to live a perfect life and die so you could be reconciled to God because he will cover the evil that you've done, and we've all done moral crimes, we've all done evil, would you accept that? Would you trust in him? And if the person's just not interested, you can probably do 4 things. Maybe you can do more than this, but these are the 4 that I've been thinking about lately. Number 1, you can pray for them, of course. Number 2, you can plant seeds at appropriate times. Plant seeds that not only support your worldview, but show that their worldview doesn't work. Just not a lot, but every once in a while. You can love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do, as we mentioned earlier. And then number 4, you can wait. Why? Because if they're ever going to be interested, it might be when tragedy strikes, and tragedy strikes all of us at some point. When that happens, they're not going to call their atheist friends. What's the atheist friend going to say? Oh, stuff just happens. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, the student will summon the teacher. But right now, not interested.
Very good.
So try those 4 things.
Thank you, sir. And you said realmessiah.com.
Realmessiah.com. Or you can just Google Dr. Michael Brown. He also has askdrbrown.org. But realmessiah.com, I think, is the site for all of the objections that some people give to say Jesus isn't the Messiah. He counters all those.
Great. Thank you.
All right? All right, thank you. Jake?
Hello, I'm back.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to address something that you said in an answer you gave to someone else earlier, and it's this idea of, I forget the exact words you used, like the traumatic event. What was the specific verb?
Impact event.
Impact event, yeah. And you used like reports on 9/11, like remembering where you were on 9/11 for an example of this, segueing that into sort of evidence for perhaps the legitimacy of reports on the resurrection. Personally, I come from a psychology background. That's what I study here at UNCW. So I just wanted to bring up, I think it's interesting that you would use this as a topic and specifically use 9/11 as an example. Because as you can probably imagine, 9/11 is one of the most heavily studied impact events in the contemporary history of modern science. And it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but your intuitions on this are exactly and perfectly wrong. As it turns out, the very large amount of people have demonstrably false claims about where they were on 9/11. There's a lot of science and a lot of interesting things that go into this, but sort of a reason you use to support this claim is actually one of the reasons that's used to show why it's false. Hearing something over and over leads to a belief. I guess you seem to enjoy your cultural references, so one I might use to point this out is the Luke, I'm your father versus no, I'm your father, where the vast majority of people might have at one point believed that the sentence was Luke, I'm your father, when that's just not the case. So just wanted to see if you had a response to that, where you using these 2 pieces of evidence, when in reality it's been very heavily studied that the claims you're making are patently false.
I think if we surveyed everybody in this room who's old enough, they would know where they were on 9/11.
Sure, they might think they do. But that's sort of the point, right? Is any answer you give, you believe to be true.
Okay.
But the point of the studies is to show that these beliefs are impossible.
Okay, Jake, I know exactly where I was, who I was talking to, and what was on the TV at the time.
Yeah. That's
okay. Cool. Secondly, it might be the case that, yes, people get wrong certain details, but do you think anybody at 9/11 in Manhattan would mistake that the Twin Towers fell that day?
Probably not.
No.
But that's not the claim.
Yeah, that is the claim I'm making is that they would have known if he had risen from the dead.
Sure.
Okay, that's the point. Not that they might remember every single detail, but they will say, I saw him, I witnessed him.
Sure.
Just like the people at 9/11 said, I saw those things came down, I will never forget it. That's the point I'm making.
Okay, and I just wanted to show you that the way in which you had phrased impact events and how they affect testimony.
How did I say it wrongly?
So what it seemed to me, the point you were making, was that the fact that people were, the fact that this event was an impact event for these people leads the testimony to be more likely to be accurate.
Yes.
So the response I would give is that just because something is shown to be an impact event doesn't necessarily mean that it's more likely to be accurate. In fact, it has been shown that the opposite can just as easily, if not more easily, be true.
Okay, well, we'd have to look at those studies because personal experience does not bear that out. Okay,
yeah, of course. I'm saying this less to like change your mind on this and more to sort of put this out there that the things that you're saying might not necessarily be true, and even just for you in case you want to change that in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Sure. But my main point is the big issue. In fact, let me just give you one other just so we're clear on this. And this might be helpful when people suggest that, oh, there's errors in the Bible, there's errors in the text, and therefore they couldn't have remembered all this. Take a look at this for a second. Titanic sinks, 1,500 die. The Carpathia was a ship that came over to pull survivors out of the water. They say 675 out of 2,200 were saved. Titanic sinks 4 hours after hitting an iceberg. 866 rescued by Carpathia. Probably 1,250 perish. The Newark Advocate, worst ocean disaster in world's history. Titanic goes down, 1,341 lives are lost. Wow. 868, they got the same number here. Washington Post, 1,800 souls lost, says latest wireless from the Olympics. 675 saved, most women and children. Notice in these accounts, these are the dead that were reported by these 4 different sources. They're all different. This is the rescue that were reported, and they're close. These 2 are the same. These are close. What are the true numbers? I guess the question is, what should we conclude from these seemingly contradictory accounts? What do you think?
Sure, but
what would you conclude from that, Jake?
That testimony about specific events isn't necessarily accurate.
Okay, but what do they all agree on?
The fact that the Titanic sank,
That's
which is
it.
what I was going to
that's
bring
the point.
up. That's what I was
okay.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, they may get minor details wrong.
Sure.
Now, in this case, it may be because they didn't have enough information at the time, right? But no one would say, since they disagreed, the Titanic didn't sink. In fact, do you know that eyewitnesses on the Titanic disagreed over how it sank? Some say it went down whole, others say it broke in 2.
Sure.
What do they all agree on? It sank. Now, you might understand why they came to different conclusions.
Sure.
If you're on the side of the ship, you might have seen it break and go down, but if you're on the stern or the bow, you didn't see it break, and you said, oh, that whole thing went down at once. Also, it was dark, they were in shock, right? But there is not a person that did survive that will tell you the Titanic didn't sink.
Sure.
Okay. That's what I'm saying with regard to the resurrection and 9/11. That's my point.
Makes sense.
All right. Thank you.
I appreciate that. One last thing, then I'll run away forever. I do find it, I'll use the word interesting, that you would describe God using like dead babies as collateral to create like saints. That's a little weird to me. That's it. Thanks, dear.
I didn't quite get that last part, but... Flippantly, it's just an example. That's all. It's an example that people do die, and even a baby dies, and it does ripple forward. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you.
Awesome shirt. Yeah.
Again, awesome. Yep. I guess first I want to just thank you for talking about difficult subjects like suicide. You have a whole episode on this, and it was the episode that saved my life. So thank you. It's a tough topic, and you do a wonderful job in the episode. I would encourage anyone to listen to that episode. Go back and listen to it. It's great. I guess.
Can I ask you, was it the episode we did on Mike Adams?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And I had to step out for a second, but I often think how tragic it was because I think about Mike. He was a believer. He didn't make it. And I think about how tragic it is that he died in such a short period of time before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And if he had been alive for that, what an amazing that would have been for him to see.
Well, he's seen it. He knows.
Yeah,
I
believe that.
Thank you.
I guess I have one brother who is a tulip Calvinist, and I have one who is an atheist. And I guess when you talking earlier about God having a plan, I hear that very often, and I would wonder kind of where you fall on that, I guess where that comes from, God having a plan, because earlier you also mentioned that God gives us the scriptures to kind of guide us morally, and we have free will to operate throughout the world. So where is the balance between God's sovereignty, God having a plan for your life, and your responsibility and free will to navigate through that? Is it God having a plan, and whenever you don't follow it, he just makes up a new one? Or is it God has the Bible, and maybe he'll whisper to you, but likely this is your revelation here?
I'm not sure we're predestined to talk about this. But look, since God is all-knowing, whatever universe he creates, he knows the outcome. It's unavoidable. If he's all-knowing, he knows whether he creates this universe, he knows what's going to happen, or that universe, he knows what's going to happen. But because he knows what's going to happen, does that mean he's causing it to happen in the sense that people don't have free will? The answer is no. I know the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow, but I'm not causing it to rise in the east.
When you say different universes, are you saying you believe in the multiverse, or?
No, I'm saying if he could have created another universe other than this one where we didn't exist, or he could have created no universe,
right?
Or he did create this universe. But whatever universe he ever chose to create, he knows the outcome because he's all-knowing. But knowledge does not imply causation any more than when a mother puts down her infant to go to sleep at night. She knows that infant at some point in the night is going to wake up and want to eat. But she's not causing it to wake up.
Right.
She knows what's going to happen. So God knows what we're going to do, but he's not causing us to do it. So yes, we are chosen because when he created this universe, he knew the outcome. But we're still free because we're freely doing what we're doing. And that's why my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, many years ago wrote a book called Chosen But Free. We're still chosen, but we're still free. Now, the people, forgive me for this, but the people who are hard five-point Calvinists and the people who are atheists have the same problem.
Free will.
The problem is that they're determinists. There's no free will.
Right.
The atheists say we're molecular machines, we're moist robots, and everything we do is the result of the laws of physics. And the five-point Calvinist says, the hard five-point, not all of them, but the hard five-point Calvinists say God makes all the choices.
Right.
Well, if God makes all the choices, then why are we morally responsible? And that means God is also the author of evil because he's making the choices for us to do evil. This seems to be a complete sham world.
Right.
So I think God does choose, but we still have free will.
I hear the same things on this side as I hear from Sam Harris sometimes on free will and from atheists, and obviously it's very complex and there are books written on it, but I just want to kind of get your opinion on it.
There's a good website you can go to, a good YouTube channel that will be helpful. It's called Soteriology 101. Leighton Flowers runs that. He used to be a hard five-point Calvinist, and he gave that up because he thought it didn't work scripturally and philosophically, and now he speaks on this quite a bit on that YouTube channel. It would be helpful.
One final quick question on as far as the synoptic gospels goes. It's I guess believe that they're derived from a Q gospel. Is that right?
Well, the Q source, that's debatable.
source.
Is there a Q source?
Is there? Will we find it?
Well, we've never found any document labeled Q, and scholars argue over this. Q just means, it's a short for Quelle, in German means source. Did Mark have a source, and Luke have a source, and Matthew have a source outside of one another, and they call that Q, and scholars debate it. I mean, Luke does say he checked with other eyewitnesses, right?
Well, given the circumstances of I guess what you call the Bible divine preservation, seen as how it stands up more against other historical documents. Okay.
Oh, it stands up very well against other historical documents.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you call it divine preservation, or would you kind of have to see a miracle in that a little bit?
Well, look, God can inspire any process he wants. He can use other sources other than the gospel writers did have sources, according to Luke. He checked with eyewitnesses, so there's nothing wrong with that. There's not even anything wrong with God inspiring editors, right? As we believe, certainly the first 5 books of the Old Testament traditionally written by Moses, but there were people that came in behind him, like put his own death in there, right? I mean, he didn't write every word.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with that. That could have happened as well.
Gotcha.
All
Appreciate
right?
you being here.
All right. God bless. Last question. Here it comes. Yes, sir.
So,
Jack.
Yes, sir. In Genesis 1:1, we hear about God dividing the waters from the waters, the firmament. What does this mean? Is this a literal description of God's creation?
Which verse are you talking about?
It's in Genesis chapter 1. I don't have the exact
Well,
verse.
we'd have to exegete the passage, and I don't know. I'd have to look that up. That's one of the problems. The Bible has, I know it doesn't have verses, but when you put it into verses, there's 31,000 verses. And so I don't have them all. I don't know what every context of every verse is. I'd have to look that one up and try and discover what it meant. But in Genesis 1, you have God created the heavens and the earth. That meant the universe. And then the next verse says, and the earth was formless and void. So you go from God creating the whole universe in verse 1 suddenly down to just the earth. And a lot of people will say, well, if the heavens and the earth are created in verse 1, and now we're talking about the earth in verse 2, what happened in between there? Doesn't say. Okay, so this gets to the question of how old the universe is, and people debate that. But I think we have to take a hard look at the text and try and discover what it's trying to tell us.
Okay. I've got one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did Adam and Eve have belly buttons?
My gut tells me that wasn't a good one, huh? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm going to say yes. My girlfriend says no.
She's
This is
right.
a big issue.
Yes, dear. Remember that, Jack. Yes, dear. All right?
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. All right, guys, we got to go soon, so let's keep these short if we can.
I'll make this quick because it's getting late. So I've asked, every time I ask another Christian this question, I always get one of 2 answers. One is faith, and the other is circular reasoning. But the question is, why do you think the Bible is inspired?
Why do I think the Bible is inspired? Because Jesus thought it was. Everything rests on Jesus. If Jesus really rose from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, why trust Jesus? I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says, okay?
Right, but we know what Jesus said from the Bible, so a lot of people would push that in the circular reasoning category, and it can't make any...
Yeah, the problem with that is we're not looking at the Bible as if it's an inspired text at this point. We just want to see if the documents that were written down are telling us the basic historical truths. And the multiple attestation that Jesus kept quoting the Old Testament and calling it the Word of God is enough for most historians to say that's what Jesus actually did. He did affirm the Old Testament, and he promised the New Testament. So that's why I think it's inspired. That's why I think it's inerrant. Not because I can answer every single question on it. Who can, right? It's a huge series of documents. I'm just going on what Jesus said. If he's God, whatever he teaches is true. And I think there's enough evidence to know the basic teachings of Jesus are actually the ones we have contained in those documents. Not because they're inspired Word of God, but because they're historical documents. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Final question, Joe. Go ahead.
I'm back, Frank. So I think I found what he's trying to show me.
You're trying to find what?
What he's trying to show me. I started out with sin, and what he's bringing it to is the Great Commission. You read that a little bit from that tonight, and that's the only thing I flipped through my Bible that I went right to. I didn't seek, it just came up. About 2 weeks ago, this guy at church dinner, he said, he was looking at me and he challenged me about the Great Commission. He got real serious. I haven't been the same since. And so I guess the point is like what you do with your courses, you're obviously starting to create disciples, or you're doing it in depth. But if we're not doing that, like, it affects my sleep. Once I was challenged and I see it, and when I look at it, everything structurally, I was an engineer, so when I see structurally what needs to happen, if we don't create disciples, nothing else happens. We stop progressing. So is it a sin to not create disciples?
Well, anything that we are not doing that Jesus told us to do would be a sin, right? There's sins of commission, where you, say, commit adultery or, steal something. And then there are sins of omission, when God tells you to make disciples and you have zero to do with that, okay? So, yeah, in fact, James talks about this. If you know what the right thing is and you don't do it, that would be a sin of omission. So there's sins of commission and sins of omission, yes, both.
And it's pretty serious, because it's the first of the three things he talks about in Matthew 28. It's, make disciples.
Yes.
So if we're not doing that, Christendom is, we're in trouble.
Everybody might be doing that in different ways, in different bits and pieces, okay? You're actually making a disciple when you're just, someone's not a Christian, but you're moving them toward Jesus, right? You're just getting them to believe that truth exists. It's one of the problems with evangelism today, is that people think they have to get everyone to the foot of the cross with every conversation. If you think that, you'll never do it, and it's not realistic. That might happen every now and then, but you just want to move people toward Jesus a step at a time. Think of baseball. Just get first base. Just get them to believe that truth exists. Then maybe later God exists, and after that, that miracles are possible, and finally Jesus rose from the dead. Now they're home, okay? But you don't have to, in one conversation, think that, I got to get this person to accept Jesus, and then I've got to disciple them. It's a long process.
Yeah, thank you. And as we get more mature, we can build in more complexity.
Sure.
It can become more like your coursework. It gets more complex.
Exactly. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hey, folks, thanks out there for watching, and thank you guys for being here. Just so you know, we have a show on Monday nights that we video for TV. We're going through all the top archaeological discoveries of the Bible. It's not every Monday night. You can go to our website, crossexamine.org, but it's live streamed, so if you want to watch it. This week we're going to go through 383 reasons why Joshua is historical. You go, 383? Yeah, and I want you to write every one of them down. Anyway, you go to our YouTube channel, you can see it. The next college we're going to be at is going to be Ohio State on the 19th of October. Then we have a couple in Northwest Missouri the next week, and then Auburn on the 26th of October, and then University of Cincinnati on November 2nd. So keep an eye on our channel if you know anybody, or our Cross-Examine website. If you know anybody in those areas that want to come by, or you know anybody that wants to watch it, they can. By the way, what you just saw here, like all of our campus events, is on YouTube, thanks to this guy right here, the great Clinton Boland. So if you want to see any of this again or refer